Okay, good afternoon. Hope you had a good lunch break and welcome back to session 4B. We are doing a mission impossible because 5 presenters within 1 hour. So let's see how far we can get. May I call as first presenter Job Odhiambo? Is he around? Hello?
Hi.
Hi, please. Yeah.
I'm going to present on behalf of Job Odhiambo and Professor Marina Novelli.
Very welcome.
Who we have worked with on this project. So allow me to present. I may not show my video because it will affect my connectivity. So bear with me so that I'm able to share without interruptions. So I'm going to present a program that we are working on that is supported by the British Council under the Innovation for African Universities about building future entrepreneurs in tourism in Africa. Our program is entitled Accelerating Youth Entrepreneurship and Innovation for Sustainable Tourism in Africa. This program has several partners. It's implemented in it's a Sub-Saharan Africa project. We are working together with South Africa, Ghana, and Kenya universities, and 2 ecosystem partners. Specifically, I would like to acknowledge Professor David Chao, Strathmore University, Kenya, Dr. Kobe Mensah of the University of Ghana, and Kwache Donkor and Daniel Adidwa of African Tourism Partners, and ourselves, STTA, Job Odhiambo and myself are ecosystem partners in this program. Our program manager, our project manager is Job Odhiambo, who is present here and will help me with taking any questions we may have after this. So as I mentioned, this is a British Council supported program that is meant to foster innovation and entrepreneurship in university. I think the key words to underline are innovation, entrepreneurship, and development of skills, because this is what is important for accelerating entrepreneurship amongst youth or young people in Africa. Ours is one of 24 projects in Sub-Saharan Africa. I have already mentioned who our partners are. And of course, our project lead is University of Brighton, and an ecosystem partner in the place of entrepreneurship training is a program called Inspire and a centrum at the University of Brighton. So our project is aimed at fostering pathways for developing innovative mentorship programs. There have been many mentorship programs for different youth in tourism in the region, but our keywords here are innovative mentorship program that will enable youth, young people graduating from tourism schools and universities to take advantage of opportunities, build their skills in entrepreneurship. And by the time they're leaving universities, they have projects that are bankable, that are ready to be implemented, but they are also digitally oriented and climate friendly. It's such a complex mix, but we are excited that so far we have a number of students that are engaged in this program. This program was divided in 2 phases. Phase 1 was about research and situational analysis, which where we had to find out from the youth themselves and other ecosystem partners issues around youth employability and ability to engage in innovative entrepreneurship ventures. So we did that research. I'll just talk about that situational analysis. We did that survey in Kenya, in Ghana, and in South Africa, with an overall of 166 responses and focus group discussions that involved 40 participants. we thought that that was quite an achievement in the short time that we had to do this situational analysis. The reason why we have few participants from South Africa is because they got engaged in the program a little later than Kenya and Ghana. And then there were some complications with approval of research. We had the approval of research done at the University of Brighton, but we had some challenges in South Africa, so we could not reach out to as many participants in a short time. But we are confident that the findings are representative of the situation of youth employability in tourism in sub-Saharan Africa. So I have talked about the ethical considerations, that this was approved, the research method was approved. We had limitations, which I've already mentioned, which led to only 11 responses from South Africa. And I have said we were probably ambitious in thinking that we would get the equal number of participation and from that part of Africa. But all is not lost. We learned a lesson here that engaging partners in additional countries will ensure that we have academic partners in advance in every country so that we can get a smooth process of approval. The findings are interesting. There is high unemployment rates among youth in sub-Saharan Africa, with tourism being an important sector for creating jobs. There are many tourism training institutions, but youth employment persists. The tourism value chains in our countries are more advantageous for creating employment for low-skilled workers than high-skilled youth. And so our graduates are considered in the marketplace as a high-skilled workforce, and therefore are not given a first priority. This is also because the low-skilled workers are paid less wages or salaries than the more skilled labor. So the industry has leaned towards low-skilled labor in Africa. And given that much of tourism in Africa is nature and culture-based, it means that most of it happens outside of big cities and in rural areas. And the labor is even more cheaper in those particular areas. So the inclination towards low-skilled labor. Most tourism students in universities will not start businesses because their barriers are not addressed, and there are barriers that they identified. One of them is that the curriculum fails to provide learners with entrepreneurial mindset. So a lot of them leave college seeking for employment because they have knowledge to apply in the tourism industry, but they do not have knowledge to start enterprises in the tourism industry. Another thing that we learned, they said that they have limited access to affordable credit, even when they have ideas. They have that limited access, and that inhibits entrepreneurship amongst youth in Africa. We also found out that while the students have high potential for adopting digital innovation, the costs of accessing those infrastructure is very prohibitive for most of them. So most ideas never see the light of day because young entrepreneurs are not able to access the digital infrastructure. Then there's the general fear of failure, because students, like we have said, have not been exposed to that mindset. The current system of training trains all of us to excel and to succeed. And so we are rewarded for high marks. And when we don't get these high marks, we are seen as not very good or mediocre or failures. So everybody believes that success means doing well means that you have to succeed in everything that you do, and students are not taught to fail and start again. So they are not inclined to choose an entrepreneurial path. Yeah. But a good finding also was that social enterprises may provide adequate employability opportunities for graduates. because they require advanced level of knowledge and skills and are created for understanding problems youth face. We have found one such platform, which is a social enterprise, which is Inspire, and there are many others, a few others, not many. We would wish to see many others come up that can support entrepreneurs. We also find that these social enterprises provide opportunities that will create inclusive and decent work for the youth while addressing poverty and environmental problems. The study concluded that tourism graduates are likely, this is a very good finding, they are likely, it gives us hope to start and grow social enterprises if they were provided with access to mentorship programs that bridged the gaps in curriculum with those additional support needed like finance and digital infrastructure. So what is the overall analysis conclusions? They will start, and this was a very good, this enabled us to move into phase 2 of the project, because then we knew that we just needed to find innovative mentorship programs that would bridge the curriculum gaps. But at the same time, phase 2 of the project will then work on those curriculum gaps that have been identified by students in their training. So our phase 2 of the project, after we successfully presented a case for mentorship of youth in entrepreneurship, now we had an opportunity to implement a youth mentorship program. And we had these 4 high-level objectives: to promote entrepreneurship and innovative thinking, to leverage on digital platforms where students can have access to knowledge, not just while they're in this program and beyond this program, to enhance peer-to-peer knowledge between our universities and our institutions in Ghana, in Kenya, and in South Africa, and ultimately to use this knowledge to lobby and advocate for policies that are favorable for young entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs in tourism. This Graham Spaces chart is just to illustrate that we are looking at impact at all levels, right from the individual to the highest organization of tourism, because this is the only way that we can actually impact all the SDGs. So it is everyone from the individual. We are now focusing on the youth, but ultimately we would want this to escalate into global strategy. We would want it to escalate into national policy. We would want it to escalate into the private sector operations, that it becomes a path that is going to be used for growing tourism. I will quickly go through, I have how many minutes?
Judy, can you please round up, because we have 4 more presenters in this session.
Okay, so. Okay. I'm rounding up very quickly. So we had 2 packages in this part 2. Like you have seen, we are leveraging digital technology. We looked for a model that would work and adopted a model for SMEs to a student startup model in a program that we call the Open Innovation Approach. Students are now being coached using this Open Innovation Canvas on how to identify and build entrepreneurship activities, and also to train trainers amongst the university academics so that entrepreneurship can be integrated into learning, as well as peer-to-peer learning. Part 2 of the program, part 1 was about building the students' capacity. Part 2 is about building the capacity of the lecturers and academics, and we are going to have exchange learning. So students in Kenya can join a class in University of Brighton and can join a class in Ghana or in South Africa. These students who emerge out of the mentorship program will be awarded. We have a fellowship program. The best students will receive a fund that will enable them to start an enterprise, and they'll be able to compete in the Africa Youth in Tourism Innovation Summit that will happen later in the year in July. Then we have a program, thoughts to sustain the program into the future. And one of the best ones, we have 4 ideas, but we think the best is to scale up our initiative to a digital platform that is called Inspire Africa, which will be delivered in other locations and with additional partners across sub-Saharan Africa. This program, you can also learn about it at the upcoming Sustainable Tourism Africa Summit, where it will be presented in detail and for learning in Kenya later in the year. We can all unite and grow. This is the motto and spirit of this program, unite to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please, delegates, if you have specific questions to Judy, use the chat in the meantime, as we might not have much time for discussion online. I would like to invite Kezia, if she is around.
Yes, I'm around. Hello, Professor Renee.
Hi, Kezia.
How are you? So should I continue to present?
Please, please.
Right, let me try to share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are able to see your screen now.
Yes, is it clear now?
It's clear. You can start, Kezia. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Renee, and thank you for the opportunity to present. My name is Kezia Mkwizu from the Open University of Tanzania. In Tanzania, welcome to my presentation, which is a paper on advertising dynamics and destination evolution in Africa's tourism promotion. With the introduction is that tourism is considered not only the pathway to industrialization and quality of life, but also powering up Africa. However, the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, has forced destinations to evolve in terms of rebuilding tourism in new ways. New ways under the umbrella of the new normal, like the increased use of virtual reality and vlogging, are forging ahead. Despite the new ways, traditional ways of advertising tourism products are still relevant. For example, television advertising through TV programs. As COVID-19 variants exist, African countries have to rethink their advertising as destinations reopen for tourism. Hence, the motivation to explore advertising dynamics and destination evolution in Africa tourism promotion, specifically to explore forms of advertising dynamics and destination evolution in Africa tourism promotion. The main concepts in this paper are advertising dynamics, which has already been explained by other authors and scholars, but in this paper, it refers to advertising dynamics as change of forms of advertising used in a destination due to shocks like the COVID pandemic. The other key concept is destination evolution. It has been defined as the impact of stakeholders' adaptability in response to external or internal influences. This is by Haywood, 1986, and Ioannidis in 1992. But in this paper, I also adopt the definitions from Haywood and Ioannidis. The theory frame that has been used in this paper is evolutionary economics geography, the EEG theory, that assumes economic spaces are constructed and influenced by path and place-dependent processes over time. Scholars such as Bruder, Clave, Gill, and Ioannidis 2020 have used the EEG theory to understand tourism destination evolution. This paper applied the EEG theory to explore forms of advertising dynamics and destination evolution in Africa tourism promotion. In terms of summary of empirical literature review, is that there are few studies on advertising dynamics in the African context and fewer connecting to destination evolution. In Africa, international tourists' monthly arrivals in 2020 were only 533,000 compared to 1 million in 2021, according to Statista 2021. Equally, Utilus 2022 noted that TV viewing in sub-Saharan Africa is projected to be the fastest in the world in the next 5 years. Statista 2021 revealed also that in Africa, television advertising spending is led by South Africa with US dollars 436 million, then followed by Nigeria with US dollars 276 million, and then Morocco, US dollars 97 million. Now, table 1 shows the forms of advertising dynamics in terms of forms of advertising before the COVID and during the COVID. Now, in the table, we can see that in the COVID era, according to Sally and LD Aziz, they showed that virtual advertising was used for virtual tours in Safari, for example, in Kenya, and also virtual tours of heritage sites in Egypt. And according to Statista in 2022, we can see the forms of advertising dynamics before the COVID involved TV advertising, mobile, internet, radio, newspaper, out of home, and social media advertising. Whereas in the COVID, there was TV advertising, there's mobile advertising, internet advertising, radio advertising, social media advertising, out of home advertising, and then the strongest advertising medium, TV and video for Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, South Africa, while for Morocco, it's only TV only. The methodology used is literature review approach with integrated literature review method involving gathering of relevant information from books, journals, reports, and conferences on advertising dynamics and destination evolution, and also the application of content analysis to assist in analyzing content from the integrated literature review. The findings and discussions that in table 1 clearly indicates that from the COVID pandemic shocks, the trajectory is path dependency in mostly TV advertising in terms of forms of advertising for Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, Tanzania, and Tunisia. This suggests that findings align with statistics on TV viewing for Africa as declared by Eutelsat 2022. Further findings show that the path creation for Kenya and Egypt in terms of forms of advertising is virtual advertising through virtual tour, safaris, and heritage sites in the COVID-19 pandemic. This implies that Kenya and Egypt as destinations have both path dependency and path creation for forms of advertising as the destinations evolved from the shocks of the COVID pandemic. In conclusions that destinations evolve across different countries in Africa, the advertising dynamics exhibit either path dependency or path creation, while other destinations display double trajectories of both path dependency and path creation in tourism promotion. And practical implications that tourism stakeholders, particularly destination marketing organizations, to consider advertising dynamics as destinations evolve in the COVID era so that repeat visitors fall back in love with tourism in Africa, as well as attract first-time visitors. Future studies can use quantitative and qualitative methods to further explore advertising dynamics and destination evolution in Africa tourism promotion. And these are the various references that made up this presentation, and also those additional references. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kezia, for an interesting presentation. Please, once again, use the chat to ask questions to Kezia, or if you want to know more about her topic. In the meantime, I would like to call on Adrino Mazenda and Bernard Ripinga if they are around. Are they around?
Yes, Chair. Thank you so much.
Great. The floor is yours then.
Okay, let me share. Thanks very much, Prof.
Your It's not yet shared, I think.
Or it's not shared?
I see Kezia. Kezia, maybe you can. I see still Kezia's presentation. Yes, there you are. Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chair. As you've indicated, Chair, my name is Bennett Ripinga, and I'm with my supervisor, Dr. Mazenda Entrino, from the School of Public Management and Administration at the University of Pretoria. So allow me to present this paper on the impact of the determinants of levy collection and revenue collection in Gauteng credit accommodation establishments. And this is just the outline of the presentation. And by way of introduction, Chair and everyone, basically the tourism marketing South Africa levy is a 1% charged on the invoice of the public who purchase tourism services from registered establishments who are registered to collect the levy. And this levy, the tourism levy collectors base has been stationary since its inception in 1998, despite the benefits that were introduced to encourage establishments, to collect this levy. And of course, the levy is an additional funding towards tourism marketing, which is administered by the Tourism Business Council of South Africa and is utilized by the South African Tourism, which is the marketing agency of the Department of Tourism, to, of course, attract tourists and foreign direct investment and ultimately grow the economy and create jobs. And there's, of course, an absence of legislation and extensive literature on the tourism levy in South Africa, and also Gauteng graded accommodation establishments. And as such, the literature across the world possessed a mixed outcome of levy administration and revenue collection in the tourism sector using various methodologies. And I refer to the literature that I've highlighted here, which most of the studies were conducted using qualitative methodologies. And so this study adds to the literature by exploring the administration of the tourism levy on revenue collection in Gauteng credit accommodation establishments using the stepwise logistic regression. In terms of the research objectives and questions, the research objectives were to determine factors that influence the levy collection by Gauteng credit accommodation establishments, and also provide possible recommendations to enhance revenue collection. And the research questions were: what factors influence levy collection by Gauteng credit accommodation establishments, and what possible recommendations to enhance revenue collection? So based on the research objectives and questions, and as well as the potential determinants that could influence the levy collection, we also tested the variety of hypotheses, which will be presented in the findings. In terms of the materials and methods, the study adopted a quantitative approach and a cross-sectional design, and further applied the stepwise logistic regression. The data was collected through the online structured questionnaire, which was distributed to 229 Gauteng graded accommodation establishments, which was selected through a stratified sampling approach. Now, in terms of the variables, the dependent variable was whether the establishments were collecting the levy or not. And the independent variables were the potential determinants or the factors that could influence the levy collection, which were based on the literature, as I have highlighted in the slide. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all of them. They are stated in this slide, as you can see. In terms of the empirical model, as I've indicated, the study applied the the stepwise logistic regression to predict the relationship between the dependent variable and independent variables. And so this model assumes a linear relationship among attributes and can result in biasness if data has a non-linear relationship among attributes. And so the model assisted us in terms of estimating the coefficients to determine how well the model can explain the independent variables using the Nagle-Kirk R-squared. And the study, we also ran some diagnostic tests to determine the goodness of fit of the model that is most suitable to predict the factors that influence the levy collection. As you can see, the Nagle-Kirk R-squared was at 0.701, which implied that the independent variables explained 70.1% variability of the dependent variable. And so the remaining 29.9% was influenced by variables that are outside the study model. And so the omnibus was significant at 0.001. And this implies that the model is useful. But before you actually relied on the model, we ran some Hosmer Lemshaw test, which you can see. And the chi-square was at 4.613 and a p-value of insignificant p-value of 0.798. And according to the Lemshaw, Hosmer and Lemshaw rule of thumb is that this model has a strong logistic model fit, which means that it's quite reliable. And so this is our stepwise regression model. So the stepwise selected the three impactful factors on the levy collection. Firstly, the high levy rate charge significantly predicted the likelihood of collecting the levy with a beta value of -3.74 and a p-value of 0.033. And the odds ratio were 0.024, which indicates that the high levy rate charge was likely to reduce the collection of the tourism levy. And secondly, the lack of transparency in terms of how the levy is used was a challenge on levy collection, significantly predicted the likelihood of collecting the tourism levy with a beta value of -3.475 and a p-value of 0.034. The odds ratio in this case was 32.305, which means that those that are collecting the levy were 32 times more likely to perceive lack of transparency, as a challenge compared to those that are not collecting the levy. And the thirdly is the clear levy collection process, which significantly predicted the likelihood of collecting the tourism levy. And the beta value in this regard was 11.61 with a p-value of 0.010. And the odds ratio were 5.005, which indicate that clear levy collection process was likely to improve the collection of the tourism levy rate by 5 times. And this brings me to the recommendations of the study. The study recommends a review of the levy rate. There are 3 options that we are proposing. The firstly is the flat rates per night. And in this regard, there could be a threshold that can be set in order to exempt low-cost establishments. And secondly, a percentage on the total accommodation cost per night. And thirdly, it could be a flat amount per person per night, depending on the star rating or grade. There's also a need to improve the transparency on the usage of the levy, as well as its current benefits. One way of doing this also is to show the return on investment for specific provinces and localities. Also propose that the levy revenue collected from the levy should be earmarked and ring-fenced for general tourism promotion, as well as special projects that can facilitate tourism growth and development. There's also a need to help establishments to operationalize the 1% levy and offer advice and extensive simplified instructions to a less resource levy, SMMEs, to those that don't have proper property management systems, those who are still using your manual system, accounting systems. There's also a need to for an automated collection system of the 1% levy directly from the establishments into the TOMSA account. There's also a need for continuous monitoring and evaluation of the impact of the levy and its current benefits. And these are the list of references for the purposes of this presentation. And thank you very much, Chair and everyone.
Thank you very much for your very clear presentation. And once again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat for now. May I call upon Lemay Lorente Quesada and Mark Boekstein.
Hi, Prof. Hi, everyone. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, thanks. I must say your pronunciation of my name was perfect. Lemay Lorente Quesada, thank you very much. Because it's Spanish and everyone always gets it wrong. So thanks very much for that. I don't know if you guys can see my screen. Prof, can you maybe assist me there? Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen, but it's not a full screen. It's
yes. Okay, I'm going to share now the full screen. Just let me know if it's visible.
Fine.
Okay.
Fine.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks very much for affording us this opportunity to present our work today. This is my name is Lemay Lorente Quesada, like Prof very well introduced me earlier. I am a lecturer in the Economics and Management Sciences faculty at the University of the Western Cape, and my co-author is Dr. Mark Boekstein, also at the University of the Western Cape. The paper that I'm going to present today, it's work in progress because it's part of my PhD dissertation, and it's titled To Disrupt or Not to Disrupt, Evidence from Black-Owned Small Accommodation Businesses in Cape Town. Which is, I will share a few of the preliminary findings that I managed to collect so far, from the data collected so far, and I think it's pretty interesting what transpired. So just a brief presentation outline before I go into the content, and I'm just going to provide some background to the study, obviously, just to put context to it, and discuss a little bit about the sharing economy, which is pretty much, at the core of my research, and also just outline some of those preliminary findings that I mentioned right now. So with further ado, we'll start with a presentation. There's no denying that tourism and hospitality, they actually are great contributors to growth. And developing nations and emerging economies of South Africa, they do tend to rely a lot on this kind of industry, which is soft industry, but still, there is evidence and statistics South Africa pre-COVID-19 or pre-pandemic, estimated that the tourism industry contributed to close to 3% to South Africa's GDP, which is really remarkable. Just to put it in context, 1 in 23 employed people, in South Africa worked in the tourism industry, and which translates pretty much to, more people working in the tourism industry than in mining. So that is also quite an interesting, statistic about the industry and how important and its role, in contributing to and propelling growth. Another important stats and point from the report is how the accommodation sector, has been singled out as a key economic driver in the industry, and that's pretty much something that all of us here are aware of. Obviously, this is pre-COVID-19, so many things have changed in the meantime. The focus, as I mentioned before, the focus of this presentation is, of the research, sorry, my apologies, it's on accommodation businesses, and specifically Black-owned accommodation businesses in Cape Town. So what an important aspect of Black-owned accommodation businesses in post-apartheid South Africa is that most of those businesses can be found in the so-called townships or informal settlements. And this is not, it is a well-known information, among the specialists in tourism. This is a very attractive and interesting type of practice, because township tourism, it's a whole world of literature, body of literature about township tourism available, but it does attract a lot of visitors, mostly international visitors. And once again, I'm talking about pre-COVID-19 and also local visitors. And one of the reasons why it's so attractive and interesting is obviously it's an opportunity for people to engage in cultural tourism, just to and experience the insights into township lifestyle, which is quite fascinating. And I think that as a niche market, it is very much still alive, and it could be even much more beneficial to those trying to gain access and opportunity into that market. However, it's very sad that almost 20 years after democracy, Black ownership in the tourism industry, and specifically in the accommodation sector, remains underrepresented. And this is a conversation for another day. However, it's important to mention it now, because we cannot escape that reality. If we want to transform the industry, there has to be equal opportunity for everyone. And at the moment, it's not the reality. The hospitality industry is dominated by white-owned enterprises and by large and well-established brands, international brands. This has been mentioned again and again, but we will need to continue talking about it. So that is what is happening from the South African, in the South African context, and elsewhere, or global, international. After the 2008 global, economic financial crisis, there have been many changes, and specifically disruptive innovations started kind of becoming the trend, in terms of how businesses were being, traditional business models were being challenged. And the hospitality industry did not escape that new trend. And one of the changes that really kind of shook, the industry was the advent of the sharing economy. And in a nutshell, the sharing economy, for those who are not familiar with, it is a business model that offers the opportunity to share resources, goods, services by means of the internet. So there is a very strong fourth industrial revolution component embedded here. And I think that it has just boomed and grown enormously. An example of a sharing economy business model in the hospitality industry is Airbnb, and we're all familiar with Airbnb, either because you read about it or because you yourself used it. It's a very familiar term and business for the 21st century person. However, this interesting business model enables the individual who is a homeowner, in this case, to rent the personal space, the rooms, apartments, to other people on a short-term basis. So that's why it has a great deal of appeal. Airbnb has really imploded, however you want to call it, and in a way that it has become an extremely successful business model worldwide, not just a specific markets. It's just really a worldwide phenomenon. What are the attractions? One of them is, the availability of offering these services, and goods at relatively lower rates, and that is very important, mostly in financially constrained markets. This is really attractive. Extra income for the people providing the service, stronger communities with better opportunities, and I'm gonna actually maybe not say better opportunities. In some cases, yes. In some cases, as you're gonna hear later on, it might not be the case. However, it's one of the benefits, that Airbnb embeds. And obviously very important, the minimal startup cost and financial opportunities. So those are amazing, and it paints a rosy picture for Airbnb and the benefits that it offers or might offer to those people tapping on that opportunity. However, there are cons, that come along with the whole process of disrupting the market. And one of those cons is, and I think there is an element linked to the previous presentation, and it is the business model that Airbnb has. It's very difficult to regulate. So the lack of regulation on these short-term rentals presents a huge issue, not only for governments, but also for those businesses that are well established already within the accommodation sector, within the hospitality industry, and they really tend to struggle, to compete directly with this very aggressive disruptor. And that is the reality that many businesses had to face. At the beginning, there was a lot of kind of opposition. So the early opposition, of Airbnb entering, inevitably entering and penetrating the South African market was met with opposition by hotels and other business, accommodation businesses. However, slowly people started realizing this is another opportunity to grow, not only and to tap into a new market share, which is quite an interesting process. However, what happened is that white-owned businesses, and this is anecdotal evidence, there's not enough evidence yet, but there is a little bit of evidence collected by other researchers. Anecdotal evidence points out to how white-owned accommodation businesses tend to capitalize much better, on using Airbnb and other disruptors compared to the Black-owned accommodation business owners. And that is a reality, and it is an indictment, of South Africans, unequal distribution of wealth, and how that definitely affects the possibility of sustainability and success. That takes us to the study. What is the focus of the study? A key objective of the study is to understand the extent to which Black-owned accommodation business in Cape Town use disruptive innovations such as Airbnb to access new consumer markets and facilitate business success. This is very important because, we cannot talk about just accessing the market. You need to talk about, we need to find out and understand how can they sustain this particular success. So the methodology is very qualitative. It's a very qualitative study in nature. Semi-structured interviews were conducted with tourism officials in the Western Cape, and also with a selected number of Black-owned B&B owners across Cape Town. The interviews were conducted both face-to-face and on Zoom. It was quite an ordeal, the Zoom part, because the irony, I'm looking into how people, these business owners utilize, and use the skills, to actually tap on these new opportunities, but then the findings will speak volumes, and for themselves, exactly what my concern is about. So all the interviews were recorded after consent was given, and each interview lasted approximately 1 hour. A very important part of the analysis is that I used thematic analysis. Please bear with me, this is work in progress, so there is much more to come, in terms of the findings, but this is what is already being identified, and I'm quite happy to see that it's taking some shape, It's not just a Frankenstein, but it's actually a fully formed, research. Before I go into the themes, sub-themes that were, just 1 minute. When we look at the background of the participants, the age group is a problem because it's basically middle-aged owners, mostly female-owned businesses, very low level of education, no access to, no known access to skills and training development programs. The themes speak for themselves. There's uncertainty about funding, adaptability to change, fear of failure. They do not know how to actually get access, to the existing structures that are there to help them. But it's a contradiction because the officials, they claim and they show evidence that there are structures there to help the small business owners, and yet it's not happening. So obviously that is food for thought. Lastly, the preliminary findings are suggesting that transformation in the sector is happening at a very slow pace. We need to talk about this, okay, for another conversation. Black-owned accommodation businesses in Cape Town, they seem to be lagging behind because of that, and not able to use the opportunity to tap on new markets. The poor technological infrastructure and poor access to skills development programs are big challenges. Over-reliance on international markets is a big problem, and there is the world of opportunity for the sharing economy, for them to use, disruptive innovations, but they need to change the mindset and the business model. Thank you very much. Any questions? Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before having questions, I just want to find out if Kimo Bukamba is around, because he was scheduled as the 5th presenter. Is Kimo Bukamba? Because if he's not, then we have room for questions, also for Lamai or for the other presenters. So are there any questions? Any questions from the participants to this session? If not, I would like to start maybe with one question, going back to the first presentation, but maybe it's also relevant in light of the last presentation of Lamai, that of course we have faced an enormous decrease in numbers of tourism all around the world, but also in Africa. And in that sense, if apart from tourism as a source of employment in the last, let's say, 1.5 years, also discussions have been around in Africa to find other sectors of economy as promising for the future. There's a certain danger to go back to tourism as the main source of employment and income in light of what happened in the last 1.5 years. I don't know if Judy is still around, and others, Lamai, you want to reflect on it.
Yes, I'm still around.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Please, Judy, first.
I think from experiences that we're having in Kenya, and which might apply to a number of wildlife-based destinations where communities are involved with tourism. We don't have a lot of urban tourism, like the case of Cape Town, where we have owners of small bed and breakfast places. But we have seen the surge of Airbnb in the cities, but these are your normal apartments where people own apartments and have an extra apartment, and so they're letting out one on the Airbnb. But yes, there is a danger on depending on tourism entirely, especially for communities. We saw in community conservancies in Kenya during the pandemic, the conservancies that have adopted tourism as their economic vehicle, we saw tremendous support, financial incentives, without which it will not have been easy for these communities. And these financial handouts started in 2020, and most of them are scheduled to end in mid-2022. But I still see requests for more support, which means that we are probably going to have 3 years of giving handouts to communities in tourism in conservation areas. And that tells us that there is something about the current model that is not sustainable. So tourism can return, but we can't return to the same model. There's something that we've got to do about this model that allows the communities to consider a mix of livelihoods and not just tourism. And so for the first time, there's a very strong case that communities in conservation areas in Kenya should be allowed to practice tourism conservation alongside pastoralism. It's always been an argument that pastoralism does not go well with wildlife tourism because it reduces the value, the experience of travelers when they come across cattle and close to conservation areas. But the communities that survived on their cattle during this pandemic, together with the handouts. So this is what enabled them to survive. So yes, there is need to rethink the models of community engagement in tourism, especially in places where communities had forgotten or forgone everything else, every other livelihood that they knew, and now were totally becoming dependent on tourism. The risks are just too high for communities, I will say that.
To what extent does that also play a role in your project? This more general finding, this general observation, because the project is very much on entrepreneurship related to tourism. But does this mean that, let's say, the last 1.5 years has also implied certain changes in the project?
I think the last 1.5 years has informed the project more. There was a point where in 2020, mid-2020, there was a lot of young people who were graduating out of school and did not know what to do and where to go. And those who were already in tourism, who had been employed or who had started their small enterprises, were all giving up. And you will read a lot in social media that this is the last time I'm working in tourism. And indeed, yes, our studies did find out that there are many tourism graduates who are ending up in the banking industry and the communications industry and the IT and other places, and not working for in the tourism industry because of those issues that I did highlight earlier on that we found out from the studies. So our study is meant to influence policy, to rethink how tourism is offered as a career and what should be emphasized and what is important in that offer, in the mix that is being offered today, and that there is serious need for innovation. And we believe that innovation that is also climate friendly and sustainable means that we are mentoring students who will holistically look at tourism and be able to question certain traditions about tourism. Like that's what I just mentioned, or tourism cannot happen where pastoralists are because they interfere with wildlife and they interfere with the quality of the experience. So we want innovations that will be able to question certain traditions and build resilient models of tourism. And that is why we did share that chart where we were looking at the impact at all levels, at the individuals up to the largest strategic making decision bodies in tourism.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the clarification. Lamar, you want to add anything or?
Yes, that was amazing, Judy. Thanks very much for that. Yes, Prof. I mean, just to a little bit of context. I come from Cuba, which is a very, heavily relies heavily on tourism and international tourism, and it, the whole industry was decimated for 18 months almost. Until the country could open up, so, and I looked at as what not to do. We definitely cannot rely entirely on tourism, or even some destinations like Cape Town suffer greatly precisely because of the heavy reliance on international tourism. But there is a glimmer of hope, and Prof, this is interesting because during the summer holiday, I've noticed something completely different. Usually hard tenors, people from the north, they travel south and stuff during the summer holidays, but it's usually like a distinctive group of people. I would say more affluent, upper middle class in terms of that socioeconomic bracket. However, I noticed a much more diverse cluster of groups traveling south, and that is the kind of local tourism that we need to tap on, and that is the kind of model that I think we should think about, Judy was talking about innovation. This is kind of part of our innovation. We need to reflect, how do we attract the local market and not just rely heavily on international income from international tourists. It's great to have the foreign revenue coming in. Nobody's denying that. But if we have as well, a market that is attracted to what our destinations have to offer, so then why not? So we need to think about making it official. You know what I mean? And it must be part of the strategies of all the different, at all levels of government, local, provincial, and national level. That has to be the way forward. So that is my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any other questions or remarks or observations? Maybe you've seen, by the way, in the chat that the session 5B will start at 10 minutes from now. So we have a little, we can also have a little break, but we can also allow a couple of questions if there are any questions left. Is there anyone?
Yes, please.
Katia, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Renee. Yes, thank you so much, Judy, that you explained about how those that could not be accommodated in the tourism sector during the COVID-19, they were able to get jobs in the other sectors. Don't you think that also speaks volumes about the education they have attained in terms of tourism, that the education they get from tourism is also trans-sectoral? Because the ability to move from tourism to another sector, it's a very strong one. And I think it's a resilient move. So what is your take on this?
I believe that's another way of looking at it, but I think it's because tourism trains in strong customer service values. And so wherever there is a need for customer service, a properly trained tourism and hospitality professional will fit in very, very well. Yes.
Oh, excellent. I agree on that, because it's all about customer care. Yes. So thank you so much. That's all I wanted to point out, that tourism can also be a good source for other sectors. And the way the youth have been able to shift to other sectors, I think it explains that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey. Any other remarks, questions, observations? If not, then I would like to thank everybody for participating, for listening, for presenting. And I hand over the chair position now to Noeline Wilsnach, because, well, she will take over for the next session, which will start in a couple of minutes, let's say 7 or 8 minutes from now. Noeline, are you around?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Prof.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and hope to see you again in the next or one of the other sessions. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to session 5B. The theme of this session is going to be African tourism, transport, and infrastructure. And with that, I'd like to welcome the first presenter, Dr. Wakelin Tron.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Is that big enough?
It's just a small part of the screen. You can maybe make it a little bit bigger. Just press the button just a little bit up from where you are. Just that present button there in the corner on the top left-hand side of your screen. Yes, perfect.
All right, okay. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Nicola Wakelin-Teran, and I'm from the University of Johannesburg. Today, we are looking at the sustainable transportation in the taxi industry, or the love for the taxi industry, or more for South Africans that are more familiar with the taxi industry, the love and the hate relationship. So I just want to greet everybody the real traditional way this afternoon. Sabona, Dumela, hello, and good day. This is real African time, and obviously different signage applies to different consumers when they take a taxi. Initially, where my love for the taxi industry started was during COVID, and we saw a fear of the taxi industry. The taxi drivers, taxi owners, and the taxi marshals were very fearful of the industry. They had no income. They had to rotate because there were no cross-border travel that was allowed. And they relied heavily on the grants from their family members. The taxi industry is fundamentally rooted in the informal sector and provides employment and self-employment, and a very big part for the youth that is the largest portion of the population. And without transport, the economy will not grow, and there will be no growth on the social development side of things. And yet, during the COVID times, we saw that there was a rise of the gig economy. So my second study that I wanted to address was, what is the gig economy or the technology bringing to the tourism industry to alleviate poverty, and an industry that does not have the support from the government? and yet contribute to growth. So what was it that actually will take this industry further? All right, the theoretical framework that I built this study on was that, or is that the taxi industry operates on a system. We need infrastructure, we need taxis, we need taxi owners, and it's an integrated system, the taxi industry. So that was really the framework that the study was built on. The literature actually allured to the taxi industry has become more regulated in recent years. We've got various taxi associations and the taxi owners need to become part of this association. And this is where we see Santiago and Faraday, which operate on in geographical areas and on specific routes. Yet these associations have never, regardless, it has no regular power, although it regards itself as mandated to bring order to an unregulated industry. The gig economy could lead to interference in the labor relations between taxi owners, taxi associations, and the drivers. In addition, the taxi industry has the means to enhance various sustainable practices to advance the taxi industry. So that brings us to the objective of this study that was conducted. What changes are likely to be implemented in the near future? And to also determine if there's a gap between the future of transportation and the contribution of the taxi industry. Literature allured to the Sustainable Development Goals, and specifically here it looked at Sustainable Development Goals 3, 9, and 11. The literature also allured to the different sustainability dimensions, which is obviously the social dimension, the economical dimension, and the environmental dimension, all to advance the sustainability within the industry. The literature also discovered or allured to the green economy for the taxi industry. And here we can see that the road transportation sector in South Africa contributes 91.2% of the total emissions. This is according to the Department of Tourism. And the road sector will be the focus for the green transport strategy, as it allows for the greatest reduction opportunity. So we really need to focus on the road transportation to make this industry more greener. When we look at the taxi industry and transportation in general out there, we see a lot of mobility that's taking place, shared mobility. And we see corporates are sharing cars, moped sharing, bicycle sharing, electronic bicycles are being shared, and a lot of subscriptions to these services are actually taking place. We can see electrification cars are on the increase, yet not in South Africa. We see autonomous driving, also not. It's here, but it's not effective because we haven't got the charging points. We see drones and cars. We see the shared mobility as indicated. The impacts of the shared mobility will be less emissions, but more space would be required. It will target specific groups that will take advantage of the shared mobility. We will see lower car ownerships as people will be making use of shared transport, and thus lower car dependency. But we need more awareness in this field, and specifically on the tourism, on the taxi industry. Routes can change if we make use of these shared mobilities. Empty seats can be filled. And then, of course, combined cost will come down as people share. And we will get real-time arrival and departures with these shared mobilities. And users are adapting to new applications to make this work for them. We also see different alternative forms of mobility. The car rental industry, the taxi and the shuttles are normally core. What we see now is car pools or casual car pools or van pools. And they are moving towards bike sharing, car sharing, and e-hailing. And we can already see e-bicycles in Cape Town at the waterfront. Lately, we see electrical bikes in a nature reserve outside Pretoria. And we're getting bigger places for people to walk. That will accelerate the future. Autonomous vehicles have appeared, but difficult to see how integrated outcome navigation will play within the next generation. It's not really visible at this moment in South Africa. However, during 2021, the South African Taxi Association launched a recapitalization program. And this is really to undertake the public transportation to a next level, where they want to introduce safe transportation modes to the passengers. And they want to introduce the right size of vehicle with a correct number of seats. And they also want to brand these taxis. And they want to take illegal taxis off the road. And they want these taxis to operate in designated areas. However, continuous investigation is required for the greener vehicles and the compressed natural gases that these vehicles have an output for. The current infrastructure is very poor and not equipped to deliver the products and services as from the filling stations, the electrical vehicle charging stations, that is all not in place. Yet the industry mentioned that, the SA recapitalization program mentioned that in 2021's report. The barriers currently is adapting to climate change is associated with additional resources, and lots of financial support is required. There's a lack of awareness and training and capacity within the taxi industry. And yet there's no short-term urgency and nor political priority that we have noticed for the taxi industry. And then we've obviously got the social barriers, the affordability from the taxi owners. We've got the structural barriers, the infrastructure is not there. The pedestrian environment need to change. The vehicle designs need to be adapted. Lots of planning and information sharing is really important when we move into these spaces. And of course, from a psychological barrier, consumers want to feel safe. So that is another barrier that we've got in South Africa. The methodology, just to go over it quickly, it was a qualitative research approach, and we approached during COVID taxi owners, taxi drivers, taxi marshals, and the government officials directly. It was audio recorded. And then when we look at the findings, specifically what changes are likely to be implemented in the future, the following sub-themes emerged. They want an electronic pay system where they don't have to collect the money, but rather have it into a system where they can tap and go. That will also reduce the spread of COVID. They would like to have a divider between the drivers and the passengers to keep them safe. They really looked at the financial support. They have not received any government support at the stage when the research was conducted. And they are looking for financial support even for the future. And they also realized that they will have to take exceptionally good care of the passengers and have a higher level of tolerance, because the passenger at the end of the day advances their pockets. It's important for them to take extra care of the passengers. And of course, they allure to policy to support green transport. Yet very few of those participants that we interviewed allured to policy and green transportation initiatives. When we looked at theme 2, if there's a gap between the future of transportation and the contributors of the taxi industry, the rationale was really to understand if there's any initiatives and the type of contributions made by the stakeholders. And then they mentioned, and 3/4 of the population allured to limited communication regarding sustainability and innovational practices. There's no government policy and economic input to advance alternative forms of transportation for the industry. Lack of government support and cooperation on different levels and private stakeholders to advance alternative sustainable transportation modes. And of course, there's no clear communication guideline policies to support these goals. So in actual fact, there's a significant gap between the future of transportation and the contributors of the taxi industry. While the qualitative data are definitely limited in size, as it was only the taxi drivers, taxi owners, taxi marshals, and the government sector, an in-depth understanding and greater information to inform future research is required. The study, however, allured to the possibilities of advancing the study, and the industry needs to explore ways in which the taxi industry, the workers, should be included by empowering plans for the industry, as well as innovative strategies to advance the industry. And that is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thron. And if you have any questions, would you please just pop it into the chat and we will discuss it after all the presenters have finished their presentations. Thank you so much. And with that, I'll be handing over to the next presenters, Ms. Klabela and Prof. Douglas.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you
I'm
very much.
to share my screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your presentation perfectly. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. The presentation that Prof. Douglas and I put together draws on my doctoral studies, which I completed last year. It focuses on one aspect of the research, which is on understanding information exchange and memorable visitor experience in South African VICs. Prof. Douglas was one of my supervisors at the University of Pretoria. So in line with the theme of this session, our presentation focuses on VICs, which are highly recognized resources for disseminating tourism information. Now, starting with defining VICs, the most widely used definition of VIC is the one offered by Pearce, who defines a VIC as a clearly labeled, publicly accessible physical space with personnel providing predominantly free of charge information to facilitate travelers' experiences. In this regard, VICs are perceived as the first point of contact and the main platforms from which visitors obtain information and recommendations about a destination, tourism offering, as well as other services such as travel bookings and reservations. With tourism being inherently collaborative in nature, The information available in VICs originates from different stakeholders, be at a national, regional, or local level. The stakeholders supply and obtain information from VICs. This information is then passed on to visitors to enhance their travel experiences. Now, coming to the theoretical framework, in his model of VIC information exchange, Deary and his colleagues identify VICs as intermediaries in the information exchange process, with suppliers and consumers exchanging information. Such information collaborations are important to ensure that VICs play a role in enhancing visitor experiences during travel. In our research, we used the term visitor to include both same-day visitors and overnight visitors, often referred to as tourists. Therefore, memorable visitor experience include both tourist and visitor experiences. A memorable tourism experience is an experience that the visitor not only remembers, but also treasures long after the trip is over. Considering that a memorable tourism experience is positively remembered and recalled after the event has occurred, Kim and others developed a scale with 7 dimensions to measure memorable tourism experiences. These dimensions are hedonism, novelty, local culture, refreshment, meaningfulness, involvement, and knowledge. While studies acknowledge the role of VICs in enhancing memorable visitor experiences, it remains unclear how the information exchange that take place in South African VICs contributes to memorable visitor experience. Against this background, the purpose of our presentation is to determine the factors in the VIC information exchange process that are predictors of visitors' experiences of the 7 dimensions I alluded to. Looking at the methodology, we adopted a quantitative research design to collect data using a survey, which examined the views of visitors on how the information they received from VICs enhanced their experiences in local areas they visited. We used a non-probability convenience sampling strategy to involve 152 visitors across 18 South African government-owned VICs. Self-completed and structured questionnaires were distributed online and others were paper-based. Now, several aspects involved in the VIC information exchange were used as independent variables. And these were drawn from the literature. And these aspects are first, extensive and useful information, searched and sources used at VICs, as well as those that are used for trip planning. Looking at this, we also looked at information and sources visitors prefer to use while at VICs, and also for trip planning. The third aspect that we also looked at was on visitor experiences at VICs with regard to information provision, information quality, information resources, staff knowledge, and customer service, which ultimately we combine staff knowledge and customer service as one factor. The standard memorable tourism experience scale by Kim and colleagues we used it as was our independent variable. Now coming to data collection. Now coming to data analysis. So we use several techniques, which I will not necessarily go into, but we used descriptive statistics, inferential statistics. In the main, we conducted a hierarchical regression analysis, which we used to determine the factors in the information exchange process that are predictors of visitors' experiences of the dimensions of memorable tourism experience. Now, in our analysis, we yielded three themes: visitor experiences at VICs, visitor experience at visited areas, and predictors of memorable visitor experiences. The results of the frequency analysis on visitor experiences at VIC reveal positive experiences with regard to VIC information, provision, information quality, and staff knowledge. However, when it comes to information sources, we found that the majority of visitors mentioned that they mostly used brochures at the VICs that they visited. Interestingly, visitors reported limited availability and use of online information sources in the VICs. Information sources such as social media, mobile apps, electronic touchscreens. This is despite the emphasis placed on online sources as being significant in connecting with visitors, searching for travel information, making informed decisions, sharing travel experiences. Now, coming to the visitor experience at visited areas, the results show that the majority of visitors expressed positive responses to the dimensions of memorable tourism experience. In this figure, we focus more on the predictors of memorable visitor experience. Here we conducted a hierarchical regression analysis, noting that VIC information, some sources and staff knowledge were part of visitors' experience. We went on to conduct a regression analysis to determine predictors of each of the dimensions of memorable tourism experiences. In addition to travel behavior related to increased duration of stay, the results revealed several factors in the VIC information environment that were statistically significant predictors of memorable visitors' experiences at visited areas. A closer look at this figure revealed that some factors were predictors of more than one dimension. Increased length of stay, quality of information, preferred VIC electronic information sources, useful trip planning information, and staff knowledge were the factors that were predicted in more than one dimension of memorable tourism experiences. The results show that visitors who agreed that these predictors, the 5 that I mentioned, were part of their experience in areas they visited, experienced higher levels of the dimensions of memorable tourism experiences. Now, in terms of our conclusion, we are saying the findings show that despite the limited availability of online sources in VICs, they still have a place and role in enhancing memorable visitor experiences. Higher levels of memorable visitor experiences were mostly predicted by the experience that visitors had at VICs. Extensive and useful information that visitors received, information sources they used, and the local and product knowledge they received from competent staff were main predictors of positive experiences they had at visited areas. More importantly, through information that VICs exchanged with its stakeholders, visitors were provided with memorable experiences in areas they visited. Now, in terms of our recommendations, we're looking at the 4 areas. First, we're saying to be effective in enhancing memorable visitor experiences, VICs should undertake the following. On increased duration of stay, VICs should work with destination marketing organizations to develop initiatives that encourage visitors to stay longer in visited areas. Activities in which visitors can meet local people and get first-hand insight into the local lifestyle, culture, and cuisine might encourage them to stay longer. On staff knowledge, we say staff should possess a deeper understanding and knowledge of local tourism products, which could be sourced from surrounding communities, who are an important stakeholder in exchanging information and knowledge with VICs. This presents staff with opportunities to collaborate with surrounding communities and to expose visitors to products that are likely to enhance their experiences, not only of the areas that they visited, but also of the broader region. In terms of VIC information and trip planning, VIC information passed on to visitors must be of good quality, clear in meaning, easy to comprehend, and easy to read. The information should be sufficiently extensive and useful to assist visitors to plan their trips, thus reducing product uncertainty or risk, to make informed decisions, and to direct them to tourism products that might enhance their experiences. Very important, the last recommendation that we're making is with regard to VIC information sources. The limited use of online sources as one of the findings that we found, we say may pose a threat to survival of VICs. This is also true in the era where COVID-19 restricts movement and contacts among people. Even though the study was conducted pre-COVID-19, we feel that this is an important recommendation that VICs can look at. To be effective, staff should find ways to invest in and harness the opportunities presented by emerging online sources. They should integrate diverse and multiple information sources in order to help visitors to enhance their trip experience. Staff should ensure that the information resources are also reliable and that they are in good working condition at all times. In this way, they will add value to their services and enhance the quality and depth of the information they provide in order to facilitate memorable visitor experience. Thank you, Chair. That completes my presentation.
Thank you very much for that interesting presentation, Ms. Koladi. So again, if you have any questions, I see the questions are coming up. We will definitely discuss it after the last presentation. So I'd just like to hand over to Ms. Shamila Chettiar, Prof. Larea, and Prof. Wall, please.
Thank you very much, Noeline. Let me check whether this presentation is visible.
Yes, completely visible. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. And it is wonderful to be with all of you from very sunny Johannesburg. I'm presenting work in progress, and I'm doing a PhD to develop a model for integrated tourism infrastructure planning for the South African public sector. This work, of course, is being done under the supervision of Prof. Samuel Larea and Prof. Kevin Wall at the University of the Witwatersrand. So what exactly is this research about? It is really trying to understand what the key elements are that are required to develop a model for integrated tourism infrastructure planning in South Africa for use specifically by the public sector. The research itself will develop and test a model. You have to ask yourself the question of why should anybody care? So if you walk through the literature on a number of things, it's fascinating to see. Firstly, infrastructure is the basis from which the tourism sector can grow. Secondly, what the public sector chooses to invest in terms of infrastructure actually influences private sector investment. In short, there isn't actually necessarily private sector growth without the public sector first investing in tourism across the world. Secondly, thirdly, there is a very direct link between tourism, property development, and economic development. And this is a very critical factor if you're looking at how to diversify economies and to actually make areas better. But I think one of the key kind of gaps in all of the work that I've looked at in terms of assessing infrastructure is that in tourism research to date, they actually assume that an infrastructure base is already available to support infrastructure. And therefore, there's very little work that is actually done on explicitly addressing infrastructure planning for the tourism space. This is just the contributions. I'm delighted to say that I am most excited about the practical contribution that this work will make. But nonetheless, it's not the only contribution. It will, in fact, add to a very big gap at the moment, which doesn't look at tourism supply factors, but rather addresses tourism demand factors. So where I am at the moment is that I have done a lot of reading, hours of it, a lot of talking, a lot of listening, focus groups and key informant interviews and case studies. And I've developed and in fact begun with the first iteration of testing my model. So as I say, what I'm presenting to you is work in progress. To start off with, it's important to understand what tourism infrastructure is. And in my key informant interviews and focus groups, this is a word cloud of what people said infrastructure is. There were, of course, the usual predictable elements of infrastructure, roads, hotels, accommodation, signage, lodges, etc. But also within the tourism space were some very interesting definitions of tourism infrastructure. And it was defined as experience. Infrastructure is how a tourist experiences a place. But infrastructure was also seen as something that is an opportunity. And an interesting word called relationships actually came up quite a lot in the feedback that I received from my participants. When I started the work, my first take on this was to actually find a definition. And there isn't a universally accepted definition. But there is a very good definition from the Transport and Tourism Forum in Australia, which basically describes tourism infrastructure as a supply chain of environmental, transport, and social infrastructure that actually allows tourism destinations to develop. Within that space, there are, of course, 4 areas: transport on the side, social infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, and my personal favorite was collaborative infrastructure, which is the systems and relationships that allow tourism infrastructure to be created. In my discussions, of course, with participants, there was a very strong feeling, and the red bits, as you can see in this diagram, are the ones that actually are where the changes were. There was a strong sense from the participants in my research that there should be a clear distinction between what is publicly funded and what is private sector funded. And within that, they did feel that transport infrastructure was not the only enabling infrastructure, but energy, water, sanitation, cell phone, broadband, safety and security, and hospitals were equally important. In the definition of social infrastructure, they felt that that had a very distinct meaning in a South African context, and that essentially what we should rather be doing is actually looking at leisure and business infrastructure, but also soft infrastructure like brand, hospitality, customer services, and customer excellence. And heritage infrastructure should be an all-encompassing term for natural and cultural estates. Collaborative infrastructure then stayed. Again, with my model, I started with this very complicated diagram of trying to break down how infrastructure planning happens in a South African context. And we have a very clear system of national, provincial, and local government, and our planning cycles work in a particular way. I started with an idea, of course, as all researchers do, of what should actually fit into this. And of course, I was very pleasantly surprised in my discussion with my participants, because although some of the things that I thought should come up did come up, one of the key elements that did come up was how important people are in a planning process. I'd anticipated people coming up, but not to the extent that it did. And it was people from 2 perspectives. The first perspective was those who implement tourism infrastructure, and the second perspective was the people who infrastructure is implemented for. I then had to review my model, and so I simplified it, as you can see, this diagram on the left, but came up with the idea that within the space, A national spatial development perspective is needed. Tourism master plans are required at a national level, and tourism infrastructure investment strategies are required. I then had to add in definitions, principles and assumptions, and elements of people, and to actually then look at the planning cycle. Now, what's very interesting is, in the planning cycle, firstly, no one outside of government understands it, and more importantly, they don't care. Secondly, even within government, those at a national level don't always understand what happens at a provincial level and a local level, and vice versa. So it's very interesting. Some things that people take for granted in a government planning space are not always transparent and obvious to those who don't work in this environment. I then actually developed a model, and you'll see the building blocks of the model are in the middle. But colleagues said to me, okay, policy is great, but actually all of this changes. Your direction is not just one way, actually it should move up and down. And my first iterations of the model didn't deal with people or the other elements that came up. So here's where I'm sitting at the moment, with a much cleaner model. The elements of the model are in fact still very much the same. But within that, I'm now looking at how we address the people aspects, both those people who serve, as well as those people who are served by tourism infrastructure. And into the model, I've based assumptions and definitions, and also roles and responsibilities of the various parties. How does this work in testing the model? What the research is actually saying is that there is still a need for a tourism spatial development framework at a national level. Spatial development planning is made much easier if that exists, and it doesn't exist at this point. Fortunately for tourism, they have until 2023 to develop this. Regional master plans are in fact showing a lot of promise as a tool for developing very comprehensive lists of what needs to be done for tourism infrastructure in geographic spaces. And importantly, what they're showing is a link with spatial planning and the link with economic planning. Not only do the master plans that I've listed here actually say what needs to be developed, but they're also saying what would be the return on investment of those developments in these various regions. It's too early yet to know whether the tourism infrastructure strategy and plan is actually a useful tool, although it would seem that it would be if there's a natural progression from master plans into that space. Because no tourism infrastructure investment strategies and plans have yet been developed in the work that I'm doing. So this is work in progress. I think this is going to be a lifelong journey. My next steps really in my research is to look at how the model itself can actually be integrated into policy, people, and place, and what its applicability will be within the different scales of tourism planning at a regional, a destination, and a precinct level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, so now we will move on to questions. I see there were a few questions in the chat box. I'm just quickly going to check which one of them, one of the questions were answered, because I see a few of them were answered as well. Okay, so the first comment was from Dr. Helena Williams, and it was just to Dr. Wakelin Thron. Just a comment saying this is an incredibly interesting study with detailed data and findings with key stakeholders. Thank you. And then I see here this one. I think this one was answered already. Is there anyone that would like to put on their microphones and just ask any questions right now? Okay, yes, Claudia.
Thanks, Chair. I think I have responded to most of my questions, but there is one question that I was asked to elaborate more, which is on the use of printed brochures that visitors still use. This was an interesting finding, but we looked at it from two angles. First, it's that most of the VICs that we looked at were mostly from rural areas. And because we say, like I indicated, that most do not have, or they have limited use of modern technologies. But this is something that we can still look at further, and it will be an interesting work to look at. But also just to say that this issue relating to the use of printed brochures also came out very strong in our interviews with BIC staff. And the issue of spontaneous visitors who come to the VICs not having planned any trip also came very strong as one of the issues that we looked at and we wanted to make recommendations of. So I think in terms of, I think is it Dr. Helena, I think who made that comment that yes, it did not only come out from the visitors themselves, but also in our key informant interviews with staff, the issue also came out very strongly that visitors still prefer to use brochures. But it will also be interesting to look at, because like I said, that the study was conducted pre-COVID. Now with COVID, where we have restrictions in terms of physical contact, it will be interesting to see whether printed brochures still come out very strongly as an information source for visitors. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so are there any more questions for Dr. Wakeling-Thorne? Any more questions for Ms. Chettiar? Okay, then I would just like to thank you all for coming to this session, and you will then move to the plenary right now. Thank you so much.